So good to have you with us. Let me go back to where we were when we were all mute. My name is Fraser, and I'm coming to you live from Melbourne. We have Sven with us in the middle. Sven's coming to us from Newcastle, and Nathan is not too far from Newcastle as well.
Thank you.
So I will interview these guys and introduce them to you shortly. But before we get going, just want to give you a bit of introduction and a little bit of housekeeping as well. It's good to have you with us, and it's a real pleasure to be hosting the series. Now, it'd be great to know where you're coming to us, where you're joining us from. So if you're willing, pop in the chat where you are and where you're watching from. It'd be good to see where people are joining us from. Now, this will be recorded, and if you've registered, you'll get the replay link in your email probably later tonight or tomorrow, so you'll be able to watch it again. And we also are looking at recording this and making it available to you so that you can catch up anytime you like. Excellent. So we've got Ararat, Gisborne, Melbourne, welcome guys, good to have you with us. Bentley East, nice. Yeah, Wayne would have liked to said the Bahamas.
Good job,
I'm
Wayne.
with you on that one, mate. And Brett, good to have you coming to us from your kitchen. Adam and Dandenong, Merrill in the Basin. Excellent, guys. So good to have you with us. And this is very much we want to have some engagement here and want to keep you, welcome you to use the chat. Let me introduce you to kind of what the series is going to be about and how we'll work this. You know, I guess if you look over the last few months, there's a fair bit of this that has taken place in our world. A lot of things have been happening and our world's been impacted by a lot. And often when your life is impacted, sometimes that can raise questions and get you thinking, and how you interpret those questions, how you understand what you see going on around you, is really often shaped by your worldview. And so I want to ask a question. And feel free just to respond if you'd like. But the question I wanted to ask was, how have events of the past few months impacted your worldview? Has it stripped your worldview? Has it raised some questions? Perhaps has it completely challenged your worldview? And sometimes these things that we've faced, like the pandemic, what's going on in the US, and just these things which impact your life, they can make you ask some of the big questions. Mm. And so this series is really about looking at those big questions. Does God exist? If he does, why is there suffering? Why are there pandemics? Why is there evil? These are really key questions, and we believe that the answer to them is incredibly important. So myself, Sven and Nathan, we want to kick off by saying we do not have all the answers. We have some thoughts and some experience which we want to share with you of what we've discovered, and Sven and Nathan especially will be sharing that. But we want to share that with you and give you a perspective and a worldview that answers some of these questions in a rational and logical way. So we're going to kick off tonight, and tonight we'll be looking at, does God exist? And then if he does, why does God allow suffering and evil? Pretty important questions to explore and look at. So before we get there, a bit of housekeeping. As I said, please engage in the chats. Basically, this is for you. This is about you, so we want to see your comments, ask your questions in there. You'll see down the bottom in your chat area, there's chat mode, but if you click on that, it toggles and it changes to question and answer mode. So if you want to raise a question, just flick it to question answer mode and type in your comment, And what that will do is that will come through. And what we're wanting to do is presentation will be about 20 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes of Q&A. So this is where you get to ask the questions, and Sven and Nathan will answer and give their responses to that. So while you're engaged in the chat, look, we've got people from all different backgrounds and beliefs on this, and we want to respect that, and we want to encourage you to do the same as well. So just keep your comments and your engagement respectful, but please do engage in that. So from me, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Sven Östring. Sven, good to have you with us.
It's really good to be here as well, Fraser.
Now, let's hear a little bit about you. First of all, let's start with family.
Okay, so as you could probably tell, my dad has a Swedish background, and I've got cousins in Sweden. It's a fantastic place to be. Maybe not quite at the moment with the COVID-19. Their strategy hasn't been quite as good as Australia and New Zealand, but that's all good. My mum is from New Zealand, and so my immediate family is living in Auckland in New Zealand, and I have a twin sister. So both of my parents are doctors. My sister's a doctor, and her husband's a doctor. So I'm the black sheep in the family. I'm a fake doctor, and not a real medical doctor, but I'll live with it. I'll live with it.
So you've still got the PhD, just in a different area.
Just in a different area, yes.
So what area did you study in?
Okay, so I studied in electrical engineering. I did that in Christchurch in New Zealand. Fantastic place to live, except when there's earthquakes. And I really loved going hiking, tramping as they call it over in New Zealand. And so went to the University of Canterbury, and then after that decided to go on with postgraduate work, and that was in computer networking in Christchurch as well. So yeah, that's my background.
Excellent. And your presentation, what you're going to share is a pretty big question. Does God exist? How did you get interested in this area? And yeah, I guess start asking these questions yourself.
Yes, well, I'm going to share the one of the major times in my life when it became very significant. But I guess all the way through, for many of us who are online, I would imagine that we had family that had a Christian or maybe Muslim or Jewish background, or Baha'i, whatever background you might have. And so I guess it becomes part of the furniture almost, to have some kind of religious faith. But I do remember, sometimes just kind of stopping and thinking, is God really there, or are we just making it all up? Is it, is God a bit more like Santa Claus? And so I'm the type of person that I don't like to believe something just because I've always believed it. I like to question it. I like to think it through. And if the belief is wrong, well, let's get real. Let's be rational and move on from it. But if a belief really does make sense, well, why not really to have the courage to accept it and to embrace not only the consequences, but the benefits as well of having that belief. And so, so that's one of the major reasons why I really love this topic.
Excellent. Well, look, we can see your enthusiasm and your passion. So without further ado, we'll hand over to you, and you can kick things off for us.
Fantastic. Well, let's get started, and I'll put my slide up here. So yeah, if you have any problems with what you see or what you hear, definitely put it in the chat, and Fraser will make sure that it works from this end as well. But yeah, as I mentioned to Fraser, the question, does God exist? It's it's a tremendous question. It's probably one of the most fundamental questions. And I must admit, I'm the type of person that loves to think of the big picture. I love cosmology. I love all of those ideas. So for me, this question, does God exist, is just so fascinating. It's big, it's personal as well. I'm not sure if you've ever been cross-examined by a lawyer. For those of you who have, hopefully it wasn't because of any criminal activity or anything sinister like that. But even if it was more of a sort of mundane or ordinary kind of situation, you will know that being cross-examined by a lawyer can be a bit intimidating. And that was certainly true for me. I was living in England. I had moved over there to do a postdoc at Cambridge University. And I was sitting there in my living room with my landlady and housemate, Jane, and she had a friend over, Valerie, and they were just sitting there. We were having a meal together. And then just out of the blue, Valerie looked at me for what seemed like no reason at all. And she said to me, "Sven, where is the evidence that God exists?" And an amazing question to be asked, and particularly on a Saturday night. And what it did is it set me on a journey, a personal journey of exploration and discovery as well. And I want to take you on this journey as well. What we're going to be doing tonight is effectively laying the foundation for the next 2 days that we're together. So we're here tonight. We're also here tomorrow night, 7:30 as well. And then also on Saturday morning, 10:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the foundation and then allow you to see more of the details as Nathan and I go on this journey with you as well. Where I want to take you to is out to the universe. We don't often get to see images like this, but certainly, if you've seen NASA images, if you've been out in the country on a really dark night, the universe is a stunning, stunning place. The sheer scope, size, magnitude is incredible. It's dazzling, like diamonds in the sky, to put it kind of poetically. But even as you stand there looking out at the universe, one of the things you have to ask is why? Why? One of the most basic questions that we can ask is this: why does something exist rather than nothing at all? And this is probably one of the most basic, one of the most fundamental metaphysical questions that we could ask. Why does something exist rather than nothing at all? Because the fact is that it could be the case that we don't have anything. We don't have the universe, we don't have our planets, we don't have the internet, we don't have all of the things we have around us. So why do these things actually exist? And I want to explore this with you. So the first thing we would observe is this: the universe did not have to exist. It doesn't seem like it is, just rock solid in terms of its existence is absolutely necessary. So the question that we need to ask is why? Is there a reason for the existence of the universe? Now, for many people who have a skeptical mind or have an atheistic kind of worldview, they would actually say, well, there may be no reason for the universe to exist. And that could be fair enough. It could be just a brute fact that the universe exists. But for those of you who are like me and you like to ask that question of why, you like to dig into the origins of ideas and the things we have around you, you actually do want to know, if there is a reason, could we know what that reason is? And following on from that is the observation is this: is God the reason for the universe? Could he be the reason that the universe is here? And what I want to do is I want to take you on this journey to explore reasons why we could head in this direction, why it's rational to believe that God exists. And the first thing we could observe is this, is that the universe had a beginning. The universe had a beginning. Now, this has not always been the belief and, shall I say, knowledge or position of human beings down through history. So Aristotle had a view of the universe which was eternal, that the universe had always been here. But the amazing thing is this, is that as we've reflected on the universe, as we've reflected on the sequence of events that have led up to the universe or has occurred during the history of the universe, what we observe is this, is that the universe did have a beginning. And we can base that on philosophical reasons. We can base it on scientific reasons as well. One of the strongest reasons is the second law of thermodynamics. And that is that the universe is slowly winding down in terms of energy. It's the entropy is increasing. The sun is running out of energy, and all of the other stars as well. And so this points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. And there's other scientific theories that you would be aware of as well that points to that fact as well. And what we want to look is this, is looking back at this beginning of the universe. How does that lead us to God? First of all, we could identify that whatever begins to exist has a cause. This is the causal principle. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. And that's what we experience all the time. If something begins to exist, something caused it to exist. We don't see, horses or Model T Fords or, rockets just appearing in the main street of Melbourne or Sydney or wherever you are living in the world. And so this principle is something which is very fundamental to our experience, and it is very logical and rational as well. But following on from that, we have to observe that the universe began to exist, confirmed by philosophy and science as well. And that means if we just follow the logic here, what that tells us is that the universe had a cause. There was a cause to the universe. And if you have an inquisitive mind, you want to go and say, okay, let's discover what this cause is. And if we look into the characteristics of this cause, first of all, we have to recognize it's immensely powerful, whatever the cause was, because it could bring an entire universe into existence. It needs to be transcendent. It needs to be beyond space and time. It needs to be immaterial. It's not a physical cause, because our space-time universe is all of physical reality. The other thing, it needs to be uncaused. And this is because we cannot have an infinite regress right down back through history in terms of causes. And finally, and most importantly, it needs to be personal as well. It needs to have the personal power of choice to bring this universe into existence. And let me continue on from that and share with you a unique property of the universe. And I'll diverge here slightly by sharing an interest of mine, which is that I love to play the violin. And for those of you who know about stringed instruments, you'll see at the back of the violin there's pegs which allow you to tune that violin. But if you want to tune, say, the E string, often what we do is we put what we call a fine tuner on that, because we get a really minute, really fine-tuned ability for the violin. It's really helpful. And what we see in the universe is that the universe is finely tuned. The universe is finely tuned. What do I mean by that? The universe has a number of constants, a number of relationships. One is the gravitational constant. There's also electromagnetism. There's the strong nuclear force. There's the weak nuclear force. So the strong nuclear force holds the subatomic particles together to form matter. The weak nuclear force is the thing which holds the nucleus of atoms together and is related to radioactive decay. nuclear decay. And all of these constants are very finely tuned, not only for themselves, but also in relation to others as well. And the question is, why is it finely tuned? Why is this universe finely tuned? And it's so finely tuned that Professor Roger Penrose calculated. He's a professor at Oxford, and he calculated that the probability of having a universe existing that resembles the one in which we live, the one like ours, is 1 in 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. For those of you who understand the maths, the exponents there, that's an incredibly large number, which means the probability is very, very, very small. The probability that we would have a universe where we could actually exist, intelligent life could exist, that stars, that galaxies, planets could actually exist is infinitesimally small. And we have to ask, why is that the case? Why is the universe finely tuned? So we come with this observation that the universe is finely tuned for intelligent life to exist. And we could identify 3 possible ways that could be caused. First of all, it could be due to physical necessity. So the universe just had to be that way. But cosmologists recognize that we need to rule out this possibility. Why? Because the gravitational constants, all of those physical constants, are numbers which could have been otherwise. There's no reason to believe that they had to have that particular number with all of those decimal points. So it's very difficult to see how it could be physically necessary that we have the fine tuning that we do. Secondly, could it be due to chance? We love chance, rolling the dice, playing lottery. But could it be due to the chance? And the reality is that the probabilities are so low, so formidable, that chance is also ruled out as well. Now, you might say, well, what about the multiverse? Well, there's significant problems with the multiverse hypothesis. First of all, there's no physical evidence that there's a multiverse. But also as well, there's the problem of what we call a Boltzmann brain. It's a concept that I would need to take some time to dive into, but it's a very significant challenge. And there's another thing as well. The multiverse itself needs to be fine-tuned way back at the beginning as well. So it leaves us with the final option, which is design, which is the remaining reason why we could say the universe is finely tuned. And this one is the best explanation. It's the best explanation for why we see the universe is finely tuned. So it points us towards the existence of God. I also want to dive into your cells, into the nuclei of your cells as well, nucleus. Inside your cell is an incredible molecule called DNA. And inside DNA is information, incredible amount of information. In fact, Richard Dawkins made this comment. He said, after Watson and Crick, we know that genes themselves within their minute internal structures are long strings of pure digital information. What is more, they're truly digital in the full and strong sense of computers and compact discs and MP3 players and files, not in the weak sense of the nervous system. The genetic code is not a binary code as in computers, nor an 8-level code as in some telephone systems, but a quaternary code with 4 symbols. The machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. It's like computer code. And this is Richard Dawkins himself. Bill Gates made a very, very similar comment as well. And so if we were to go down to the beach and if we were walking along the beach and we came across a mound or dune of sand that looked like this, stay alert, hashtag COVID-19. I stayed at work for you, you stay at home for us. Pretty amazing, pretty beautiful. Now the question is this, would you, when you look at that, what would you say is the cause, the origin of that information? So ignore the pretty pictures there. of the doctors and their stethoscopes. Just look at the information. I stayed at work for you. You stayed at home. You stay at home for us. Would you say that it was the winds and the waves that caused that information to be there, that you could read, that you could understand it? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't say that natural causes were the origin of that information. And if I just take the bars off the side, you'll actually see where that incredible sand sculpture came from. It came from this Indian guy who's made a number of them. So this information came from an intelligent mind. So when we're looking at DNA information or genetic information, we could make these observations. DNA stores information. But what we could also observe is that evolutionary mechanisms do not account for the origin of genetic information. And for those of you who have done coding like I have, you'll recognize that simply making small changes, random changes to code, does not lead to new information. And so evolutionary mechanisms themselves cannot account for the origin of genetic information. They can store information. DNA can transfer information, transmit information, but it can't tell you how that information arrived in the first place. Now, our experience is that information always arises from an intelligent source. So if you're involved in SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, you'll be scanning radio waves, looking for information coming to us in radio waves. And if you find that information, you would hold that is coming from conscious, intelligent beings. The same if you come across some computer code. You would know that originally that came from an intelligent source. So what that means is the best inference is that the origin of genetic information is an intelligent mind. And indeed, they've recognized that this is like God's signature in our cells. It's amazing. God's signature in our cells. Stephen Myers, who did a PhD at Cambridge University. I also want to take you to the concept of right and wrong. Right and wrong. You know, for those of you, if we look at this picture in Berkeley and in the States, there's something within us which recoils at this scene. We don't know what's happened, but there's evil, there's pain, there's suffering. There's a moral code which says something happened here which was not right. And we have to ask ourselves, where do we get these values from? Where do we get this concept of moral values and moral duties? And we could follow a line of reasoning like this. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Everything is relative. It would depend on your genetic background or your family background or the society in which you live. But all of that is changeable. We could change the laws. But if we're looking for objective moral values that transcend society, then we need to look at God himself. But this is a really important point. If objective moral values do not exist, then evil does not exist. So the very thing that we're looking at here, evil, means that objective moral values do exist. And what we see is evil does exist in the world. There's so many situations where we see that playing out, George Floyd and other situations like that. But if we follow the logic here, what it says is if evil exists, therefore objective moral values exist. And you just continue following the logic and you reach the conclusion that therefore God exists. So objective moral values points us towards the very existence of God. Indeed, the very presence and the reality of evil points us to the existence of God as well. And Nathan's going to continue on with that in just a moment. I want you also to take you back in history as well, because there was a very significant event that occurred about 2,000 years ago. And that was that we have records in the Bible of a man called Jesus Christ being arrested, being falsely charged, crucified, and then being buried. And then on this following Sunday morning, there's all of these reports of Jesus actually being raised back to life. And this event in itself is powerful evidence towards the existence of God as well. And let's just follow through the concept here. So the followers of Jesus reported that Jesus was raised back to life. They saw him, they experienced him, they talked to him. So there are 4 historical facts that support this report. Number 1, Jesus was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. So he was a Jewish senator, Jewish MP, and Joseph took Jesus' body and buried it in his tomb together with Nicodemus. The second point is this: that Jesus' tomb was discovered empty on Sunday morning. People came to the tomb and discovered that it was empty. The third point is this: is that Jesus appeared to his disciples, to his followers at multiple times, multiple places, and different groups of people as well. And then finally, the disciples publicly proclaimed in Jerusalem, where Jesus had died, they publicly proclaimed that Jesus had risen back to life. Incredible. Now, there's a very important point, which is this: is that more skeptical thinkers and scholars have explored a number of naturalistic explanations for this report. But the reality is that none of these explanations adequately cover or take into account all of these facts. They all fail. And so we can see that the best explanation is that God raised Jesus back to life. It's a supernatural event. It's an event which requires an intelligence, a power, a person called God to be able to achieve this event. And I'm going to be looking at this tomorrow night at 7:30. So to summarize, just covering the fundamental ideas here, laying the groundwork for the next few days. To summarize the reasons that we've seen for the existence of God. Number 1, God is the cause of the universe. The universe began to exist. And so that leads us back to the concept, the reality of God. Number 2, God is the reason for the fine-tuning of the universe. We see in the universe this incredible fine-tuning. The probabilities are astronomical, to say the least. And why would that be? The reason for it is that God is the intelligent designer behind the fine-tuning of the universe. Number 3, we've seen that God is the intelligent source of genetic information. And we can see that in every single one of your cells. If we took a electron microscope to your DNA. God is the foundation for objective moral values that we hold so dear. And often we may critique different situations, different, the protests in the United States and the racism. All of these things require an objective moral framework, objective moral gradient to be able to actually identify and critique those events and those situations. Finally, God raised Jesus from the dead. This historic report of Jesus being raised from the dead is powerful evidence that God exists. Now, I just want to just draw your attention. All of these concepts are great because there's logic, there's reason, you can follow through the line of reasoning. But I want to encourage you and share with you that the fact is that God, according to what the Bible says and also what philosophy says as well, has the property of being present right here and right now, not only where I am, but where you are as well. And so if you would like to experience the reality of God, not only can we do this intellectually by exploring the reasons and the logic, but you can also experience his reality right here and right now. We can simply ask God to reveal himself. We can start to search through the historical records of the person of Jesus. And from personal experience, I have found this to be one of the most amazing journey that we can go on. And I would like to invite you to come on that journey too, not only for the logic, for the fascination, for being an inquisitive person, but also to experience an incredible relationship with the person who created the universe way back at the beginning. And we look forward to going on this journey together. Back to you, Fraser.
Excellent. Thanks, Sven. Some really challenging thoughts in there, and some big ideas that you've shared. If you've got any questions for Sven that you want maybe clarified, or thoughts that you would like him to expand on, just put it in the chat, and we'll have a chance to go through them now. Sven, one of the things you mentioned about, I think it was Roger Penrose, who gave did the mathematical equation for the chance of the fine tuning. I heard, I'm not sure if it was him or somebody else, explain it as it would be like a tornado going through a wrecker's car yard, and a 747 being the outcome. Kind of just pulling all these parts together so randomly but perfectly to create a complete something.
And that's also often used with regards to the challenge, the probabilistic challenge to Darwinian evolution, neo-Darwinian evolution as well. Fred Hoyle, Sir Fred Hoyle, who was the famous person who derogatively said that the Big Bang gave the Big Bang its name. And he said that it's like someone a super intelligence was monkeying with the physics of the universe. And that's quite a beautiful, quite a funny kind of picture as well. But it's absolutely true, because the thing is, what we're looking at here is probabilities which are truly mind-boggling, incredibly mind-boggling. And the other thing as well to keep in mind is that often people will appeal to some kind of evolutionary, some kind of Darwinian explanation. But it's important to remember with the fine-tuning of the universe that there is no evolutionary process involved with this, that these constants go back to the very beginning of the universe, that they're boundary constants, as we would say, they're boundary conditions. So it's not the case that these quantities can evolve, that they haven't evolved. They were literally put in there as initial conditions in the very existence of the universe. And so it means that we have to ask, why is that the case? And if you're not curious about it, if you're not inquisitive, I guess maybe it just doesn't interest you, or somebody who's joined us. But for people who are curious, it's a very fascinating challenge and question and issue, which points us back to God himself.
Yeah. We've got another question coming from Graham. Says this: thanks, Sven. If all you say is true, why is the majority view different to what you've presented?
Okay, that's a very good question, Graham. And the fact is this: what we're looking at is we're looking at philosophical arguments, if I could put it that way. And don't take that in the wrong way. It's all philosophical lines of reasoning which would lead us towards the existence of God. Now, there's a number of scientific observations in all of those lines of reasoning, which are well recognized. So the fact that the universe had a beginning is very well recognized, even though some people might challenge it, which is fascinating. The fine-tuning of the universe is well recognized as well. The fact that DNA stores information is also well recognized too. So what we're doing is we're using observations which are widely accepted and then following them to their logical conclusions. So that's what we're doing with these empirical, these scientific observations. Now, the reality also is that the concept that God exists is actually much more widespread than often we understand or recognize. So the reality is that in the world, if we took the global population, atheism is only about approximately 5% of the world's population. About 95% of the world believes in God or a higher power. So many of these lines of reasoning are well accepted by Muslims, by Jews, by people of the Baha'i faith as well. And in terms of, if we go to the scientific area, there's a substantial number of scientists who also believe in God as well. So I could say that the logic here is, while not everybody accepts all of the reasoning, certainly a number of these arguments are well recognized to be correct.
And so it's looking at those arguments and then following them down and having the courage to explore them to their logical conclusion, whatever that may be.
Yes, correct. And I guess if you're skeptical, if you're an atheist, what you need to really do is effectively say, well, there is no reason for the universe. There is no effective reason for the fine tuning, because of course the multiverse also needs fine tuning as well. So there's a sense in which really if you're an atheist, you just have to stop at the brute reality, the brute fact of the universe without going further. So what Christianity does is it says, let's explore the logic, the rationale, take it one step further, and we arrive at the person of God.
Yeah. A few people have just had some screen freezes. If that happens, there's a little tab at the top that says reconnect. Click on that, and that should refresh your screen and bring you back in. Apologies if it's our internet. Apologies if it's your internet. Internet's not a person, so we can blame that. But hopefully, the connection stays on. But hit the reconnect button at the top of your screen if you find that things are looking a bit frozen. We're going to try and keep ourselves moving so you can tell the difference. So another question that's come in is, what difference does it make that God exists? I mean, why should we even ask that question? Is it that important? What if we just say, doesn't matter?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And it's a bit like the question, well, what difference does black holes make? In our universe, there's cosmologists who posit that there's dark energy, dark matter. What difference does it make? And that's when we're looking at the universe, we say God transcends it. He's effectively outside it in a metaphysical sense. You can say, well, that doesn't really bother me. It really comes down to that issue of morality. That's the first thing, is that if you and I hold that moral values are really important, really significant, then that effectively connects us in a very, very deep way, a moral way, with the creator of the universe. So that's a first point, which is very important. But even more importantly as well, is that what we see, particularly when we look at the resurrection of Jesus, is that God wants to have a relationship with us. If God is a person and he created the universe for people, beings like us, and he would like to have a relationship with us, which is what we see in the Bible, in the life of Jesus. then that is really significant. To actually have the opportunity to be able to communicate to the creator of the universe is incredible, really incredible. The other aspect too as well is that if God does not exist, then a few things that we really hold dear get jettisoned as well. We talked about morality, objective morality, but also ultimate meaning in life is jettisoned as well, and purpose and hope. And what it means is that this life is all there is. That once we've done our dash, so to speak, we've been a good doctor or lawyer or engineer, then life is over, and all that we've tried to accomplish is effectively meaningless, because whatever people do with that is their choice. So what it means if God does exist and Christianity is true, and Jesus really did rise from the dead, what it means is there's hope, there's ultimate meaning, there's a purpose in life. And for me, I would say that that's incredible reason to really explore the reasons for the existence of God, and if there's good reasons to actually pursue God as well.
Yeah. Hey, we've got some great questions coming in, Sven. Monica's asked a good one. How do we know that God didn't have a beginning as well? If in the logic that you laid out, wasn't it that everything that exists has a cause?
Whatever that exists has a cause, yes.
So does that then, if God exists, what was his cause? Does that same logic apply to God?
Yeah, that's a good question. The thing is, we need to actually dive into the very nature of God, and when we are referring to God, we are referring to what we'd call the first cause for the universe, the uncaused cause of the universe. And if the problem with asking the question, if God had a beginning, is then we'd have to take that one step back, and we'd have to ask the question, well, who caused God? And then if we ask that question, we'd have to take another step back and ask, who caused the cause that caused God, kind of thing. And philosophically, there is severe problems with having an infinite regress. If we have an infinite regress, it would mean that nothing exists. So what we're saying is follow that chain of causes all the way back to the first uncaused cause. And that is who we're talking about when we talk about God. And when we look at the different aspects, the qualities, the properties of God, we see that he's uncaused. So asking who caused him is, there's a logical problem with that, if I could put it that way. We see that God is morally perfect, that he's omnipotent, all of those kind of things. I could bring in an argument or a line of reasoning called the ontological argument here, but Nathan's smiling and Fraser's starting to smile as well. It's an amazing argument, but it probably is very mind-boggling. So I'll leave it at that. But all of these
we'll need a special session for that one.
We'll need a special session, yes. But all of these properties we find not only confirmed in philosophy, in the ontological argument, but also are confirmed in the Bible as well. So the philosophically and biblically, God did not have a beginning, and he is uncaused.
Yeah. Okay, Monica, I hope that's given you some clarity, or perhaps just raised a whole bunch of more questions. And that's okay, because this is about exploring and discovering. If you do want to go a bit deeper, encourage you to hang around at the end of it. We'll happy to share emails, and we can follow up in more depth. Darius's comment question said, could it be that many people don't object to the existence of a higher power? It's just what that higher power is like. So perhaps suggesting that the view that a lot of people have of God is one that causes them to not want to follow him or like him or have anything to do with him. which is something we'll probably explore the fringes of anyhow when tomorrow night, when we look a little bit look at Jesus and his life. So hopefully we'll be able to touch on that one, Darius. And Susanna, we'll finish with this one, Sven. And Nathan, feel free to jump into this one if you want. Susanna's asked a question: if someone has doubts about the existence of God, what could they do to change that? Or how can we help someone walk through this process of discovering God and making that decision for themselves, whether they will or won't accept him, and have reason to base that on?
Yeah, that's a really significant question, particularly if you have concerns yourself. You're wondering, you're in a position where you struggle to believe in God, or maybe you have friends or family members who you would like to share your beliefs with. The thing which is really important, and this comes back to a biblical principle, which is that the initiative actually comes from God. So God initiated the creation of the universe, but it's very clear from the scriptures, from the Bible, that God initiates a relationship with us. And if you think about that, that makes a lot of sense, because God transcends the universe. He's all powerful. He knows everything. He's so much bigger than you and I. We're sort of almost like ants. If you actually take our size into comparison with the planet. And so God is the one who is initiating a relationship with us. Richard Swinburne at Oxford University calculated the probability that God would initiate a relationship with us, and in particular that he would send his only son Jesus to live with us and to die on the cross for us and to be resurrected. And he, based on the very properties of God, he identifies that the probability is very, very high. So what I'd really encourage anyone who is struggling with this, or you have someone else, is just recognize that God wants to have a relationship with you. That's the message of the Bible, and it makes so much sense. And so a simple prayer, the colloquial term of a prayer, just to ask God, please reveal yourself to me. And I am absolutely convinced from my own experience that God will answer that prayer. And I'd also encourage you to take a look at the Gospels about the life of Jesus. Amazing stories, if I could put it that way, amazing historical reports about what God has done in the life of Jesus. But also, from my own experience, I'd invite you to get a book on Christian apologetics, which is what we've been talking about tonight. Have a read, and you'll be blown away by the incredible logic and reasons. It's an amazing topic. You'll love every minute of it.
Yeah, absolutely. What we'll do is we're going to share some recommended readings and resources for you at the end of this series. So make sure you've registered, and we'll have your email, and we'll shoot you some of that stuff in about a week's time. Hey Sven, thanks so much. We're going to jump now into from Nathan. Thanks for your questions and comments, guys. Keep them coming. Nathan, I'll ask you similar questions I asked Sven. So share with us a little bit about your family and what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm a career pilot. I've thought about airplanes and loved airplanes since I was just a little boy. When I was 6 years old, I upgraded from tractors to airplanes. And my whole life from age 6 to age 42 now has been absolutely single-minded, focused on flying airplanes. So that's been, I guess, my passion. But also the last 7 or 8 years, I've really gotten big into philosophy, logic, apologetics. And so that's been a passion of mine the last 8 years as well.
So how did that passion begin? It sounds like there's a bit of a backstory there.
I guess for me, I grew up in a believing family, had some pretty big questions, and as I interacted in high school with my classmates, there were hardly any Christians at all in my school. We had about 1,200 students, and yeah, maybe there were some closet Christians, but it certainly wasn't obvious to me. And in classes, the physics professor, the philosophy professor, the mathematics professor, they took special joy in making fun of my worldview, and they would ask interesting and difficult questions and say, "Well, how do you explain this, Nathan? And what about this? And how do you make sense of this, Christian believer boy?" And I would go back to my friends, to my community of faith, with some of these questions, and it just didn't seem to me like the answers really satisfied me or my teachers or my classmates at school. And so I guess I had lots of doubts and questions. And yeah, to cut a long story short, those doubts and questions were magnified as a professional adult at the Flying Doctors. My colleagues, maybe some of them are listening tonight. You guys are awesome. Very good, deep thinking questions. I didn't have answers, and I just needed to find out more. So I decided to go and get a degree, and I'm trying to still learn more as I'm going, and I'm having a blast. And now I'm working on a PhD, trying to find out more on this topic. So I'm having a blast.
Wow. Hey, well, you've got a lot of learning and knowledge, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. So we'll hand over to you.
Now, I did upload my file earlier, and it doesn't appear to be here. I'll just make sure. Oh, here it is. Looks like we're up and live. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you can see my slide, The Man in the Water. Is that appearing for us?
Yes.
Excellent. I'd like to share a story with you tonight and then address this problem of evil. And if my mate is on tonight, this was actually inspired by one of my colleagues at the Flying Doctors, asked me some really difficult questions, and this is my best attempt at an answer. So here we go. So I'll just start sharing a story with you. First Officer Roger Pettit had been an F-15 fighter pilot, but now he was in the front seat of a Boeing 737. This was his chance to fly this leg, and his fellow pilot, Captain Larry Wheaton, would be the one that would be monitoring the instruments and calling the checklists. I'd invite you to just listen in as we go through the checklists together. So the captain was calling off these checks, left and right bleed packs to auto. Auxiliary power unit is now off. Engine start checklist is complete. And he turned to his flying first officer and said, "Are you ready for the taxi checklist?" To which Roger responded, "Go taxi checklist." So item number one, pitot heat is on. Now, it had been snowing all day, so it was quite cold, about 4 degrees below 0 Celsius. Engine anti-ice on. And the pilots at this point had a bit of a debate about whether or not to engage the engine anti-ice. Cabin controls, and so on and so forth. They went through the checklist. Now, it had been a pretty frustrating day because the snow had closed the airport, and when the airport was finally reopened, there was a backlog of traffic. And as a result of that, everybody was pretty eager to get on their way. These pilots, too, were pretty keen to get going. They'd had the aircraft de-iced by the trucks spraying on this fancy de-icing fluid that we use. The aircraft had been cleaned off, but that had been 30 or 40 minutes ago. Now it's time for takeoff, and the pilots are eager to get on their way. As they applied takeoff power, Roger, the flying first officer, called to set takeoff power. Captain did so. Unfortunately, there was, unbeknownst to the pilots, one of the probes in the engine had gotten some moisture on it, which had frozen, and so the pilots were getting a faulty engine power readout. The engine power was indicating a higher power setting than was actually being produced. The pilots did not realize this. As takeoff continued, however, the captain called off the speeds, 80 knots. Something's not right. To which the first officer replied, "Yeah, it should be okay. It looks like we're gaining speed." They called out 120 knots. And then at this point, the pilot's got off the speeds, V1, time to lift the nose up, time to rotate for the climb attitude. The aircraft struggled into the air. They took 800 meters longer than normal for the takeoff run. And the pilot sort of sensed, yeah, something really isn't quite right. Something's just not quite right about this takeoff. As that 50 tons of metal was screaming for all it was worth into the air, all was peaceful and quiet in the cabin until the very last minute. And there is 4 words that you do not want to hear when you're in the cabin. And those 4 words that we train, every operator is slightly different, but for my company, those 4 words are emergency, brace, 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 followed by an almighty impact, and then silence. We'll come back to that story. There's quite a bit to it, but just before we get there, I want to just review what Sven shared with us earlier tonight concerning the moral argument. And this is a little bit of a slimmed down version of it. What we want to just remind ourselves is that, and for definition purposes, we need to figure out what we're talking about when we use the term God tonight. I'm using the term God in a generic sense. I'm not giving preference to a Judeo-Christian God. If you happen to believe in another God, if you want to pick Shiva or Vishnu, or if you are maybe a believer in the flying spaghetti monster, this could possibly work for you as well. But just follow us through and see how it might work. If we have a almighty, all-powerful, beneficent being that existed, then there could be some standards that are right and wrong, of good and bad. Hey, you shouldn't be bashing that person up. If this being, I'm going to call it God for convenience sake tonight, if this God did not exist, or gods, or whoever it is that you subscribe to, if this being did not exist, we're left with relative, subjective, preferential standards of right and wrong. There's a bit of discussion about this. We can discuss it in the Q&A later on if you like. But I'm going to start by suggesting that if God does not exist, evil could not exist in any sort of objective sense. And we could define those terms in Q&A. And yet, the second point to remember is that if we think about it tonight, there really is suffering and pain. I'm not quite sure how you've been impacted by COVID-19. My family's been significantly impacted. We sold our car. All of my belongings are in another country. We resigned from a really good job around here, thinking we were going to have other plans a few months ago, and COVID's kind of affected us. But I'm one of the lucky ones. Perhaps you've been trying to get to a funeral. Perhaps you've tried to have a graduation. Perhaps you've had a major milestone in your family, or some major financial crisis, and you have been impacted this year. I think most of us would agree fairly easily that there are struggles in our world. There is pain and suffering. Evil, whatever you want to consider evil to be, something's not right. But if we say that something's not right, and the first premise is true, the first 2 premises require the third point to be true. God, whoever that being is you want to call, this being must exist. It is necessary, philosophically speaking. We call it a necessary conclusion rather than a contingent, a dependent conclusion. But how's this going to play out? If evil exists, now we have a God problem, because we still have pain and suffering. We still have stuff going on. And just for the sake of conversation tonight, I want to recognize the fact that there are 2 levels of discussion about pain and suffering. We can get intellectual and academic, and there's part of that in this presentation tonight, at least at a quick skim. But there's also the heart, the emotion. Maybe you personally or someone you care about has had some terrible catastrophe happen in your life recently. Maybe the wound is raw. And if so, I want to beg your indulgence with the academic discussion, because I think the heart is important too. And I'm hoping at the end of this short presentation that you'll also see the heart is a key part to this discussion and a solution to this problem. Now, imagine with me that there's a conversation between 2 people, perhaps a believer and a non-believer, and the believer might say, "There's pain and suffering in this world," to which the friend might respond, I totally agree. I totally agree. This place is really messed up. And then she might continue, I think God should do something. This person, of course, doesn't really believe in this concept. Does it bother you? We seem to be alone. Your God isn't doing anything. Yes, God should do something, but where is our help? Where is our assistance, please? The believer, surprisingly, perhaps might say, well, actually, I agree. God should do something. So we have both sides here, both people agreeing we've got problems and we need a solution. And if there is a God, the solution should be forthcoming. There's total agreement, both sides. So we agree on the suffering. We agree on the need to step in. The non-believer says, I just think God, if he were to exist, must do something right now. And here's the crux of the issue. The believer responds, that's the only part we disagree on. What if God has a good reason to wait? So as we discuss the problem of evil tonight, the real question is going to be the problem of time. We both agree, whatever side we come from, that if there is evil, there is a God problem. If God exists, he should fix it. The only question is, how many minutes can we spare God? Is God required to fix it this instant, or else he doesn't exist or doesn't care? Or is there some appropriate, sufficient, could be the term, reason that there could be a delay happening? Let's just ponder that for just a minute, and perhaps we return back to that story. As the wreckage settled into the icy cold waters, stock was being made. On the bridge, there were some cars. Some of them had been hit by the aircraft as it struggled through the air. Bystanders began to gather and watch, to wonder what would happen. Who would emerge from the wreckage? What was left of this Boeing 737? After a few minutes, a helicopter appeared, and the helicopter noticed that there was one particular passenger who was distant, separated from the wreckage. So they went to him first. They had a rope. This wasn't really a proper rescue helicopter. I think from memory it was like a police or a news helicopter. They just had a piece of rope, and they hung it out the window and managed to drag the first survivor, Bert, from the water to the bank. Then the helicopter returned to the tail, and the rope was handed down, and a tall passenger reached up for this rope and handed it to a flight attendant by the name of Kelly. Kelly was one of the aft galley flight attendants, and she was dragged to safety. On the third trip, the helicopter came back, and once again, the tall gentleman at the back of the aircraft in the floating wreckage received the rope and handed it to another passenger by the name of Joe, who was holding another lady, Priscilla. And this time there was a second rope, and that was handed to another lady by the name of Nikki. So we've had 2 taken from the water. Here now goes 3, 4, and 5. As the helicopter, and the footage is quite dramatic actually, if you want to catch it later on YouTube, as the 3 were dragged by the helicopter to shore, the 2 ladies were so weak and hypothermic at this stage, they were unable to hang on to the rope. And so they slipped into the water, both of them. The helicopter came back, and one of the ladies managed to grab a rope and was dragged to shore. But Priscilla was so weak and unable to even hold the rope that she was clearly not able to save herself, even with the helicopter right there. This started a flurry of activity on the bank, and various strong, brave men attempted to strip off a little bit and jump into the river to try and rescue her. The water was so cold, one of the rescuers actually had ice forming on his body, like on his clothes, as he was trying to swim through the current, and it was a hopeless cause until finally one particular brave, very strong man by the name of Lenny managed to get into the water, swam with a rope to get this lady, and through a great stroke of luck and great strength, managed to pull her to shore to the standing ovation of the crowd. Just a few weeks later, once a year, if you are an American citizen or you know a bit about the States, every year the president has a State of the Union address where he speaks to the whole country. And in this particular address, he decided, this is Ronald Reagan, made a special speech to honor that brave rescuer in the middle there. That's Lenny, the rescuer, the man in the water who dragged this woman to safety. He had bravely gone into the water and done what the president considered to be one of the finest and bravest things that an American can do. And the whole country clapped and cheered. Right next to Lenny there is the First Lady, Nancy Reagan. And from every year since that time, they now have a tradition when there is someone to be honored, they sit this person next to the First Lady, and that person is given the nickname Lenny in honor of this great rescuer. But we have a bit of an interesting story here because there's something else that's going on. Somebody else was in the water, and there's a bit of a question mark. Wasn't there 6 people in the wreckage? We'll come back to that in just a moment. We're dealing with the problem of evil tonight. And maybe you're thinking, well, if God is all powerful, he should be able to fix things up right now. If I were God, this is what I would do. And let me just take you to my hometown, Port Augusta, where I've been living the last 10 years until recently. That's a sad town where child abuse is unfortunately a serious problem. And I don't want to dwell on it, but even tonight, I'm pretty sure Port Augusta is a sad place for a child to be. Let's just talk about the Australian government stepping in the place of God for a minute, just for the sake of an analogy. This is an intellectual part of the discussion. Could it be that the Australian government, for the sake of argument, would have the capability tonight to fix the problem of evil and suffering in Port Augusta? Why couldn't they just march in the federal police and say, we're going to put a stop to pain and suffering, no more kids being victimized. Tonight, we are going to take every single adult above the age of 18 and we're going to put them into custody. We're going to incarcerate them. Baxter Detention Centre is right there. All we got to do is lock up everybody that's an adult. The kids can stay at home. They'll be all nice and safe. Child abuse will end tonight. Problem solved. Now, maybe you're thinking that's a little bit harsh. What about the good parents? What about the kids at home that don't have any parents to feed them anymore? There are loving families too in Port Augusta, right? Okay, well, what about if we leave the adults there and take the kids down to Adelaide? Maybe we could do another a home for the children. Maybe it could be some kind of a system where the kids are taken to a boarding school down in Adelaide. Adelaide's known for a couple of famous boarding schools. I can see it's not a great solution though, and the argument is put forward. Well, but God can see the future. God knows everything. Why can't God just fix it without all this fun and games? And for this, I want to indulge your imagination for a minute. Let's imagine, for the sake of argument, that the Australian government and ASIO, the secret police, have access to a time machine. Let's pretend, for the sake of argument, that the Australian government has the ability to see the future. They can see for the next 12 months in this time machine, their investigators can go in and they can see, looks like coming up here on June 26, Fern Street. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be, oh, really? Wow. Looks like Nathan's going to be knocking on the door and causing some problems there. We better make a note of that and arrest him before that takes place. And now let's see who else we have here. Oh, wow, there's the coach for the Little League footy team down in the Central Oval in Port Augusta. He's a pretty well-respected man in town. I bet the people won't believe when we let them know that we caught him on the future time machine capsule as well. We better put this gentleman in custody. And as they go through the list, they get a number of names. So now we have the secret police coming to Port Augusta, knocking on doors, and taking future offenders into custody before they commit a crime. Let's for argument's sake, say that the problem of child abuse is now fully solved. We have removed all the criminals before the crimes are even committed. Isn't that great? And we're going to trust the government, right? We're going to say, great, our government has seen the future. But wait a minute, wasn't that guy a good guy? Wasn't that Nathan or that Dean or that whoever the coach of the junior footy league? Wasn't the church pastor? I thought those were good people. How come they got picked up by the police? And I'm sure there's going to be questions, especially if it's you or your mate that gets picked up. How are you going to trust the government that this time machine is trustworthy? And let me just suggest, perhaps the only way that we can trust the government and this time machine is if we actually have a audit of this machine. If the public is invited to look at this machine, to send in external scientists, to send in the family and friends of those accused, who can see for themselves, yes, this machine works, yes, it's being used appropriately, yes, we can trust that due process is being followed. But what does it take to trust due process? And I'd like to suggest tonight that in order for due process to be established, to build trust, it takes time. And ironically, if you're a non-believer, and I don't mean to be mean or picky or anything, but for those of us who are non-believers, we don't have trust in God. That's why we're non-believers. So it could be that the delay is specifically for the benefit of the non-believer, because that trust isn't there yet. The believer says, I'm willing to trust God in his due process. The believer says, show me the money. I want the evidence. So maybe that could help us with the problem of time. We can discuss that a bit more in the Q&A. You know, not just stepping in and solving the problem. Imagine if the police officer or the law enforcement were to join in with the community, like this gentleman here in Michigan. This is Chris Swanson and the Black Lives Matter protesting just recently. He took all of his armor off and he jumped in the crowd and says, I'm not going to just play my duty as a sheriff. I'm going to be with the people and I'm going to work in solidarity with them. Imagine if we had an enforcement officer like Chris. Wouldn't that make a difference, perhaps, to the angst that we're having in the world today? Let's go back to that sixth person in the water. There was another man, a man who happened to be terrified of water. He couldn't swim. When he was just a young kid, I think it was like 6 or 7 or 8 years old, just a young kid, he was in a swimming pool and he nearly drowned. He was so terrified that he vowed and declared that he would never get in the water ever again. And he kept his promise until this fateful day in January 1982. He had a wife and children. He was not known as a brave person. But when the helicopter came with the ropes, time and time again, he passed the rope to somebody else. And when the helicopter finally came back the last time, he was not there. He was not there. A gentleman here, Roger, wrote, this is in Time magazine, January 25, 1982. It took a year to figure out who the sixth person was. But before they knew who this person was, these words were penned in praise of this anonymous hero. He could not make ice storms or freeze the water until it froze the blood, but he could hand life over to a stranger. The man in the water pitted himself against an implacable, impersonal enemy. He fought it with charity, and he held it to a standoff. That's some pretty strong words there. Now we've looked at Lenny, the guy in the water who was the hero. The hero initially, the guy that was praised by the president, he chose to go into the water. He could swim and he could get out of the water with impunity. He was not placing himself in the same position as this guy that was in the wreckage who had actually crashed in the airplane with everybody else. So I'd like to suggest tonight 3 points to identify a real hero when there is an emergency. Number 1, a real hero is authentic. The acts are based on the reality of a situation. They're in it. They're completely engaged as a personal participant in the crisis. Number two, it happens to be that this person is anonymous or not the center of attention. Everybody was praising somebody else. This person wasn't doing it for praise or recognition. This person did it because it was the right thing to do. And number three, altruistic, prioritizing other people over self and at great personal cost. At the end of the day, Lenny Skutnik got wet and cold, but this anonymous hero died. The Bible tells us, there's a suggestion here that there's no greater love than for somebody to lay down his life for a friend. And another place suggests it's even more amazing if you do it for an enemy. I'd like to suggest tonight that this person, Arland Williams, is a real hero. About 12 months later, as the coroner finished the report, as they went through all the victims, this was the only person in the wreckage who died by drowning. Everybody else died by the impact forces. Arland died because he drowned. I'd like to suggest perhaps Jesus is the ultimate hero. We've already agreed that there's a necessity for a God to exist in crisis. We've agreed that there should be a solution to this crisis. We disagree perhaps on the timing of the solution, but if we're looking for a hero that meets the hallmarks, I'd like to suggest tonight and invite you to consider, what would it be like if Jesus were the ultimate hero for the crises that we face? Thank you very much. Over to you, Sven and Fraser.
Hey, thanks, Nathan. Folks, if you've got any questions, I want to encourage you to shoot them through. Nathan, one of the things you said right at the beginning, if there is no God, then there is no evil. I'm just wondering if you could tease that out a little bit more. Why could there not be evil?
That's a great question, and perhaps the best way to illustrate it is with a personal conversation I had with another colleague. We were discussing whether or not it was appropriate for me to steal her car, and as I asked her, and this person doesn't subscribe to any external moral reference point, so I asked her why I should not steal her car, and she suggested to me that I shouldn't steal the car because it was against the law. So I thought, fair enough, yeah, maybe the law is a good reason. Who or what entity decides that the laws are appropriate? And so she said, well, it's a government. We've got federal laws and state laws. I said, fine. So using your logic, if law is the end-all deciding point for moral things, then every law that my government makes, every single law that is issued by my state, is right, morally speaking, regardless of what the law says. Every law that's ever been made by any law entity would be right and good. And she's like, no. And I, of course, gave some examples. What about a particular country not too long ago who made a law that said that certain people of a certain demographic had to be killed? That's I'm presuming that'd be morally noble, right? And she's like, no, you can't do that. That's not right. I said, okay, fair enough. So laws aren't always right. What do we go with next? And she said, well, we're a democracy. We've voted, we've elected our leaders, and they discuss policies. So the majority perspective, the democratic vote, tells us what's right and what's wrong. So I said once again, well, it makes sense. I can buy that most of the time. But what about the Salem witch hunts, and which she had spoken very vigorously against? Boy, you Christians like to go and kill people and make witches out of people that are just regular people. I said to her, I'm supposing that you'd be in favor of the witch hunts because the majority felt that these poor ladies were witches. And she's like, no, but the majority got it wrong. I said, fair enough. So we can't trust the law. We can't always trust the majority. How do I decide that it's wrong to steal your car if the law isn't always right and if the majority isn't always right? Now, she was stuck at this point, so I helped her out. There's four alternatives to God. If there's no God, it could be the ruling council, the legislature, the government. It could be the chief, the village elders, whatever the source of authority for your particular society is. If it isn't them, it could be a majority thing. It could be a vote. it could be the idea of survival of the fittest. Might makes right. I've got the biggest baseball bat, therefore I win. I want your car. My baseball bat's going to dong you over the head. No more resistance. The car's mine. Well, that's of course not a very nice thing to do. I'm not subscribing to that. I'm just saying what logically is following. The fourth option, if it isn't going to be a government or civil council of some description, the majority or the strong guy, the fourth option is my personal opinion. Well, I think it's wrong to steal my car. To which I'd respond, well, but I disagree with you. So I'm hoping what I'm indicating here is, if you want to get rid of God, that's fine, but you now got four alternatives to God, and all of those are relative. They're all subjective. All of those can be debated. A bigger gun, a more powerful government, or another group of majority people can overrule. So if you want to be very specific and say it's wrong to torture babies for fun, the only way you can say that is if God says it. Otherwise, it's just your opinion. Maybe you like bananas. I prefer strawberries. Preference, don't complain.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah, it helps explain that, because often I've heard people say that because there is evil and suffering, then obviously God doesn't exist because he isn't doing anything about it, which is what you raised, very early on in the piece, and teased that out. But actually, that very argument is actually more supportive of God than of no God.
Paul Draper has what he calls a hypothesis of indifference, and he basically says pain and suffering in the world is proof that there is no God. It's an indifferent universe. You had a car crash today, who cares? And if we want to take that logic, and I've had an interesting response to that on another paper we can discuss later, the problem is if really nobody cares, then there's no reason for us to care either, other than a personal preference. I feel sad that you burned my house down today, and I can get angry about it. But if there's no God, there's nothing immoral about what you did. It's just survival of the fittest. Maybe your genes are stronger than my genes. Maybe you're destroying my family to propagate your family. And if your family's better than mine, intellectually speaking or physically speaking, maybe it's better that I die so that the human race can have a stronger gene pool. If you want to be that pragmatic and utilitarian, there's really no reason other than I don't like it to object to heinous moral evil. But we all, I think, if we're honest with ourselves, most people will admit deep down inside that there are some things that are really wrong in this world. If a child is abused for the fun of it, even if it's Hitler's child, that child shouldn't be treated that way. We know it's wrong. It doesn't matter what the government says. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what the strong person says. It doesn't matter anything. It's wrong. And we instinctively know this. And the question would be, where did that instinctive certainty come from? I'm really curious. If it isn't one of those four things, where else could it come from?
Well, Darius has raised a question. Did those morals come from a process of evolution in the need to protect our community? So we create these morals to ensure that we have a way of keeping us safe and our family safe, and an agreed law that we live by.
I'm happy for Sven to jump into a great question, by the way, Darius. I guess the trick with evolutionary survival of the fittest concept, though, is it doesn't require me to be moral to win the game. It just requires me to trick you. So, Darius, if I wanted to have a really good outcome, my technique would be to, and I hope there's not too many children. I'm not saying this to advocate a position, but I'm just taking a logical statement where it would logically conclude. So Darius is an upright person. Hopefully he's working strong out there in the field. My best solution is to go to his house, take advantage of his wife, take advantage of his properties and possessions, but do it in a way that makes everybody think that I'm the nice guy. And so he's now raising and caring for my offspring that he didn't even father. They're my DNA, but he's doing the hard work. Because I'm smarter and trickier and more clever than him, he won't even know about it. Everybody praises me for being the moral upright guy, but deep down inside, I'm doing all the dirty work. There's no reason from an evolutionary theory for me to be kind and nice. All I have to do is to convince you that I'm kind and nice so that you look after me, And if I can backstab you at the last minute, like the Asmat people in in New Guinea, the rule of the game is to win. Maybe I'll depend on the group while it suits me, like the dictators, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini. They had a group of people helping them when it suited them, but when the push came to shove, a backstab or two here and there is fine because, hey, I got my objective reached. Now I'm going to go for the end goal. And I'm suggesting without God, there's every reason to backstab, and there's no reason not to. And if I can do it without getting caught, if I could steal your car, but no one knew that I stole your car, how could that hurt anybody? It certainly helped me, and I wouldn't get in trouble for it. So why not?
I think Darius might have a few things to say about that. If
Sorry,
you
Darius.
did that.
We still be friends.
I mean, certainly within Darwinian evolution, you can talk about altruistic in terms of, protecting our herd, our species, whatever that may be. But the question is, why would we want to apply those morals to another race, for example, or to another species? Why would we want to do it in an objective, transcendent way? And you simply cannot do that with evolution. There's not the ontological foundation to have those objective moral values.
I guess another point to think through too. I'm just getting distracted by the comments here. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead, Sven.
Yeah, well, Darius has just said, the altruism that we see in humanity is evidence of failure of evolution, of that moral evolution.
Sorry, my thought came back. Sorry. So just to be kind, Sam Harris is a non-believer, one of the well-known atheists. He's written a book entitled The Moral Landscape, and he is one of the few. Maybe there's others you can help me point to. He's one of the few in moral philosophy as a non-believer who does believe in objective morals and values. He thinks they exist. But he suggests, maybe Darius is familiar with this. He suggests that morals kind of run parallel to the thriving of the society. So when the society thrives together, then that is an evolutionary advantage to that particular species or group, and that can then evolve and support itself in a nice way. The difficulty we have, and this is some interesting responses that some philosophers, including William Lane Craig, have suggested, is that although the moral landscape seems to work for a lot of people, it doesn't really explain how we should deal with the psychopath. Because the psychopath also is a member of our society, and the psychopath would also like to flourish. And it could potentially be that the psychopath would like to, to do some very inappropriate things with my family members that I have no interest in even contemplating. But in defense of the psychopath, this person could honestly and sincerely claim with a straight face that this is his calling in life, or her life. This is his mission and mandate. And now we have a group of our society overriding another group in our society. But on what basis? Again, it's personal preference. I don't like you bashing up my family member. I'd prefer you didn't, fill in the blanks. But who gets to win? Is it going to be the strong person? Is it going to be the majority? Is it going to be the government? Or is it going to be my personal opinion that says I'm better than you? We're back to those four again. So we've got that infinite regress of moral foundations. Even Sam Harris, at the end of the day, as good as his theory is, doesn't account for the outliers. We've got to account for everybody. Otherwise, we have this problem of what's the reference point?
Yeah. Hey, good questions. Folks, we did want to wrap it up at 9. I hope you found this informative, helpful. One of the comments that seems to have come up a fair bit is just in both Sven's presentation and Nathan's and some of your questions is perhaps this is about our understanding of God, which God. And tomorrow night, we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail. as we look at two questions. Did Jesus rise from the dead? And is Jesus the only way to God? The Bible makes some pretty impressive claims, and some would say they're almost exclusive. So we're going to explore that tomorrow night, and hope you can join us. Now, if you found this helpful, or you think somebody else might be interested, you've got the link to register. You can still register. That's fine. So shoot that link to a friend. They can jump on and join you as well, or have them over. Now that we can, have them over to your place and you can watch it together and discuss as well. Hey folks, thanks for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you, Sven. Thank you, Nathan, for your presentations, and we look forward to tomorrow night and what you have to share.
It's good to be here with everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time tonight, and thank you, Fraser.
Pleasure. All right, folks, we'll see you 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern tomorrow night. Good night.
Good night.
See ya.